Joining me now from Purcellville in Virginia is Kamran Bokhari. He's a strategic forecaster and he's a senior fellow with the Middle East Policy Council. Really appreciate you being with us. Let's talk about Israel, Hezbollah, Lebanon and this MoU, this Memorandum of Understanding. First of all, what do you think are the risks that Israel or Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition might pose to this memorandum, or is that essentially over?
So we have to look at the imperatives and the constraints of Israel. Israel has two imperatives that are sort of in conflict with one another in the current moment. One is to counter Iran and Hezbollah. On the other hand, it also needs to maintain a very close relationship with the United States. Now, with U.S. and Israeli interests diverging in this current moment, that's becoming a big challenge for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He's being sort of squeezed between those two imperatives. So what that means is we could see two things, actually three. One is that efforts will continue by the Netanyahu government to continue to convince the Trump administration against making too many concessions to Iran. And so there's that part. The other part is its imperatives in Lebanon. And do they stop operations altogether, or do they continue some and wind down most of them? That remains to be seen, because we have still, since this MoU was signed electronically, we've seen some action by the Israelis. So how far does that go? Under immense pressure from Washington, we just have to wait and see. And the other thing is, look, ultimately, the Israelis are looking at this and saying, okay, let's see where this goes. It could very well be that when the 60-day negotiations begin, and somewhere down the line, this process collapses. And that's where we can swing back and say, it's time to go back to the military option. I think that's the Israeli calculus here.
Okay. I want to ask you about the actual text of the MoU that we've got just in the last hour and a half or so. I know, of course, we're still trying to get our heads around it, but what do you make of it? Because the general consensus so far appears to be that this is a better deal for Iran than it is for the United States. What's your take on this?
Look, it's an MoU. Okay, it's not a deal. So you can't compare this to even the interim agreement that the Obama administration signed in the fall of 2013, much less the final JCPOA in July of 2015. So I don't think this is a fair comparison, because there's a lot more to come out. This is a page and a half worth of bullet points. And so they need to be unpacked. They need to be shaped into a detailed agreement that, will take time. Quite frankly, I don't think 60 days are going to be enough because of the complexity of the situation. Yes, I do believe that the Iranians have in principle agreed to, essentially roll back their nuclear program, at least the part of weaponization. Now, do they have some sort of symbolic program at the end when everything is said and done? Perhaps, but those details need to be worked out. So I think everybody's jumping the gun. There's a lot of uncritical consumption of Iranian information operations. There's also a lot of politicized analysis. So, if you are pro President Trump, you will say one thing. If you are against him, obviously, this is your opportunity to say, hey, this is a bad deal. So there is a dearth of sober analysis here.
Yeah, there is. There are some immediate sort of effects of this. If I understand it correctly, then it's centered around the Strait of Hormuz particularly, because both sides are very keen to get the strait back open. And of course, it works in Iran's favor as well, because its tankers can now sail through that. Do you think that that is something that could be a trigger point for this, at least this MoU essentially, and these negotiations falling apart? Because both sides may want that to work, but they want it to work on very different terms.
So look, people aren't paying a whole lot of attention to the fact that there's been massive bombing of Iran. And that damage assessment is still a work in progress. So we don't know how much the Iranians are hurting. We can sort of infer that under the conditions that they are operating under, they've been hit very hard. Then yes, they disrupted the Straits of Hormuz, and their information operations say, well, we're going to work with Oman to come up with a management system in the future. Well, easier said than done. It requires a certain level of capability that the Iranians don't have. Meanwhile, the blockade has really been hurting for them. And let's be honest, prior to this conflict, they had their hands full with a public uprising. They killed, the estimates are all over the place, from 40-some thousand to, several thousand. But even the government is saying 8,000. So let's say that, 10,000 people were killed. That's still a large figure. Now, when the war ends, the war suspended that dynamic. Now that the war has ended, we could see that dynamic come back into motion, because there's going to be calm. There's going to be the questions that were sort of pushed to the side because there was a war going on will all of a sudden take center stage. So we need to see and then the leadership is in disarray. Until we see proof of life, we have to assume that there is no supreme leader, and the show is being run by the guards, and even the guards have their own factions.
Kamran Bokhari, we really appreciate you being with us on Al Jazeera. That's Kamran Bokhari from Purcellville in Virginia. He's a strategic forecaster and a senior fellow with the Middle East Policy Council. He's been talking about this memorandum of understanding that has just been signed or will be signed between the US and Iran.